The butcher had watched her for 3 mornings before he understood she was starving herself on purpose. Anya Holder knelt in the gray pre-dawn beside the well, her green fingers breaking a small round of bread into pieces smaller than a child's fist. 4 dogs sat in a patient semicircle, their ribs showing through patchy fur, and a 3-legged cat waited beyond them with the wariness of something that had learned to expect kicks. The orc woman distributed the bread with the care of a priest at altar, 1 piece to each animal, murmuring their names as if they were parishioners. The last piece she placed before the cat. Then she stood, brushed crumbs from her worn skirt, and walked toward the river with the laundry basket balanced on her hip. She had kept nothing for herself. Philip Oakes wiped blood from his hands and watched her disappear down the slope toward the water. The sky was lightening, but the village proper still slept, and the only sounds were the dogs crunching bread and the distant murmur of the river. He had opened his shop early for 20 years and had seen every variety of human desperation, but this was something else. This was methodical. This was a woman who had made peace with her own hunger, and now simply stepped around it each day as if it were a stone in a familiar path. He knew her by reputation before he knew her by sight. The orc widow with 2 children who took in washing and mending, who lived in the smallest cottage at the village edge where the forest began its long march north. People spoke of her the way they spoke of weather, a fact of life requiring neither affection nor malice. She did good work. She kept to herself. Her children were quiet. No one mentioned that she was feeding half the strays in the territory while her own frame grew thinner with each passing week. Philip was not a man given to grand gestures or sudden passions. He was 43 years old, had never married, and had built his life around the solid certainty of meat and coin, and the clean swing of a cleaver through bone. But he understood hunger. He understood the way a body could hollow out from the inside when it gave and never took. He had seen it in cattle driven too far, in dogs worked past their strength. He had never seen it wedded to such stubborn, quiet grace. That morning he set aside the best scraps from his work, the pieces he usually saved for his own stew. Organ meat, good trimmings, a section of flank with enough fat to make it rich. He wrapped it in clean cloth and set it on the shelf behind his counter where it would stay cool. Then he went about his work and did not let himself think too hard about what he meant to do. The next morning Anya came to the well as she always did, bread in hand. The same 4 dogs arrived, the same 3-legged cat. Philip watched from his doorway as she divided her breakfast among them, keeping nothing, and this time when she lifted her basket and turned toward the river path, he stepped out into the street. She stopped when she saw him, and he saw the way her shoulders drew back, the way her chin lifted. She was not tall for an orc, barely taller than he was, and the green of her skin had a grayish cast in the early light that spoke of exhaustion. Her tusks were small, almost delicate, and her dark eyes were enormous in a face that had gone too thin. She was perhaps 30, perhaps younger. It was hard to tell. "Mistress Holdern," he said, and his voice came out rougher than he had intended. "Master Oakes." Her voice was low and careful, the voice of someone who had learned to take up as little space as possible. He held out the wrapped parcel. "Scraps," he said, "from yesterday. They will go bad if they are not used." She looked at the parcel and then at him, and he saw understanding move through her expression like a cloud crossing the sun. "That is kind," she said slowly. "The dogs will be grateful." "No." The word came out too sharp, and he softened it. "Not for the dogs, for you." She did not reach for the parcel. "I cannot pay for meat. I am not selling it. I am giving it away before it spoils." "Then give it to someone who needs it." "I am." They stood in the empty street while the sky continued its slow brightening, and Philip felt the familiar frustration of trying to communicate something for which he had no words. He was not eloquent. He did not know how to explain that he had seen her feeding strays for weeks, that he had watched her grow thinner, that something in him had decided without consulting his brain that this could not continue. "You eat first," he said finally, and the words came out almost angry. "Then the strays." Not the other way around. Her expression did something complicated, a swift series of emotions he could not name. Then she looked down at the laundry basket, at her worn hands gripping the handle. "That is not how it works," she said quietly. "It is how it is going to work." He stepped forward and set the parcel on top of her folded laundry, ignoring her protest. "Tomorrow I will have more. You come to my shop before you feed them." "Master Oakes, Philip," he said, "and I am not arguing about this." He turned and walked back into his shop before she could refuse again, and he did not let himself watch to see whether she kept the meat or gave it away. He had done what he could do. The rest was up to her. But the next morning, when he looked out at dawn, the parcel was gone from where he had left it on her laundry, and she was at the well again dividing bread. The dogs looked no fatter. He could not tell if she looked any better. He wrapped another portion, larger this time, and when she came past his shop he stepped out and handed it to her without a word. "I told you," she began. "You eat first," he said again, and went back inside. It became a pattern. Each morning she would try to refuse, and each morning he would hand her the wrapped meat and repeat the same words until she took it. Sometimes she argued. Sometimes she simply looked at him with those enormous dark eyes as if he were a puzzle she could not solve. But she took the meat, and after 2 weeks he thought perhaps her face looked a little less hollow, a little less gray. He did not see her eat it. He did not know if she actually kept it for herself, or if she was dividing it among her children or the strays the moment she was out of sight. But he kept wrapping the portions, kept handing them over, kept saying the same words like a prayer or a spell. "You eat first, then them." Spring turned toward summer. The days grew longer and warmer, and the village shook off the last of winter's mud and began its seasonal work in earnest. Philip watched Anya move through the streets with her basket of washing, watched her kneel by the well to divide bread, watched her walk the river path with her back straight and her head high, despite the weight of everything she carried. He learned the rhythm of her days the way he knew the rhythm of his own work. Laundry on Mondays and Thursdays, mending on Tuesdays, marketing on Fridays when she had coin, which was not every week. He learned other things too. Her children were named Marisol and Tovin, a girl of 7 and a boy of 5, both of them the same dusky green as their mother. They were too quiet, too watchful, with the careful manners of children who knew their place in the world was uncertain. Anya's husband had died 2 winters ago, an accident in the forest, a tree felled wrong. There had been no family to take her in, no clan to return to. She had stayed in the village because she had nowhere else to go, and she had kept her children alive through washing and mending, and the occasional charity of people who did not want an orc family in their midst, but could not quite bring themselves to drive them out. Philip learned all this without asking, simply by keeping his ears open and his mouth shut, the way he had learned most things of value in his life. The village was small enough that everyone's business was common knowledge, and people talked freely in front of the butcher the way they talked in front of the baker or the smith, as if a man who worked with his hands could not possibly be listening. What surprised him was how angry it made him. He was not an angry man by nature. He had always been steady, solid, the kind of person you could rely on to show up and do the work without drama or complaint. But listening to the casual dismissal in people's voices when they spoke of the orc widow, the easy assumption that she and her children were barely worth noticing, lit something hot and bitter in his chest that he did not quite know what to do with. So he did what he knew how to do. He wrapped meat. He handed it over. He said his 5 words like an incantation. You eat first, then them, and slowly, incrementally, he began to see changes. Her face filled out just slightly. Her hands looked less like bird bones wrapped in leather. She stopped flinching quite so much when he stepped out of his shop. The arguments grew shorter, and then one morning she simply took the meat and said, "Thank you," in a voice so soft he almost missed it. "You are eating it?" he asked. She hesitated, and he saw her decide to be honest. "Some of it. The children eat most. Not the dogs, not the dogs." She shifted the basket on her hip. "You shamed me into it." "Good," he said, and meant it. A smile ghosted across her face, there and gone so quickly he might have imagined it. But it had been there. He was sure of it. And the knowledge sat warm in his chest for the rest of the day. Summer settled in with its long, golden evenings, and the thick humidity that made every task feel twice as hard. Philip's shop stayed busy with travelers heading north to the timber camps and south to the market cities. He worked from before dawn until after dark, and still he set aside the best scraps each day. Still he stepped out each morning to hand them to Anya. It had become as much a part of his routine as sharpening his knives or scrubbing down the cutting block. He began to notice other things that needed doing. The fence around Anya's cottage sagged on one side, the posts rotting where they met the earth. The thatch on her roof was thin in places, starting to let in rain. Her children went barefoot even when the morning ground was cold with dew. Philip was not impulsive. He thought about these things for a week before he did anything. He thought about how it would look, a bachelor butcher taking an interest in a widow's household. He thought about the talk it would generate, the assumptions people would make. He thought about Anya's pride, which was as obvious and unyielding as a stone wall. Then he thought about those 2 children with their 2 quiet voices and their bare feet, and he stopped thinking and started doing. He showed up at her cottage on a Sunday afternoon with a bundle of fresh-cut posts balanced on his shoulder and his tools in a sack. Anya was out front, stirring a pot of something over a small fire, and she looked up when she heard his footsteps with an expression that went from surprise to wary in the space of a heartbeat. "Master Oakes," she said, rising, "is something wrong?" "Your fence is rotting," he said, setting down the posts. "I am fixing it." She stared at him. "You are fixing my fence?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because it is rotting." He pulled his hammer from the sack and set about prying up the first of the bad posts. The wood came away easily, crumbling in his hands, and he tossed the pieces aside with more force than was strictly necessary. "I did not ask you to do this." Her voice had gone tight, and when he glanced up, he saw that her hands were clenched at her sides. "I know that. I cannot pay you." "Did I ask for payment?" He jammed the new post into the hole and began packing earth around it, his movements sharp and deliberate. "I am fixing a fence. It needs fixing. That is all." "That is not all." She came closer, and he could feel her standing over him, radiating something he thought might be anger or might be fear or might be both. "People will talk. They will say things. Let them. You do not understand. I am." She stopped, and he heard her take a breath. "I am orc. You are human. There are rules." He looked up at her then, really looked, and saw that her jaw was tight and her eyes were bright with something that might have been tears. "What rules?" he asked. "The rules that say you should not notice me, that say you should let me manage on my own. That say a man like you does not help a woman like me without expecting something in return." He sat back on his heels, the hammer loose in his hand. Around them, the afternoon was drowsy with birdsong and the smell of cooking, and from inside the cottage he could hear the faint voices of her children playing some quiet game. I do not want anything in return, he said. Everyone wants something. Not everyone. He turned back to the fence and drove the next nail home with 3 solid strikes. Some people just see a thing that needs doing and do it. That is all this is. She was silent for a long time, long enough that he finished the first post and started on the second. Then she said, very quietly, "Why?" He had known that question was coming. He had been asking it himself for weeks, late at night when sleep would not come and he lay staring at the ceiling of his small room behind the shop. Why did he care? Why did it matter to him whether one orc widow and her children had enough to eat, whether their fence was sound, whether they were safe? The answer was complicated and simple all at once. It was because he had watched her feed strays when she had nothing to spare. It was because her children said please and thank you in voices that barely rose above a whisper. It was because she worked herself to the bone without complaint and never asked for help even when she was drowning. It was because when he looked at her, he saw something that made his chest ache, something brave and stubborn and profoundly alone. But he did not know how to say any of that, so he said the only thing he could. Because you need it. Another long silence. Then she went back to her pot and stirred it, and after a while she ladled out a bowl and brought it to him. "You should eat," she said. It was thin stew, mostly broth with a few vegetables and the smallest pieces of the meat he had given her, stretched to feed 3 people with nothing left over. But she was offering it to him, and he understood what that meant. He took the bowl and ate while she watched, and when he handed it back their fingers brushed and he felt the calluses on her palms, the rough evidence of hard work and harder years. "Thank you," he said. She nodded and took the bowl away, and he went back to fixing the fence. By the time the sun was setting he had replaced all the rotten posts and rehung the gate so it swung true. Anya and her children watched from the doorway, the girl clutching her mother's skirt and the boy peering around her arm with wide, curious eyes. "It is done," Philip said, gathering his tools. "Should hold for a good few years now." "Thank you," Anya said, and this time her voice was steady, almost warm. "Truly." He nodded and turned to go, but before he had taken 3 steps, the little girl darted forward and pressed something into his hand. It was a flower, a bit of wild primrose she must have picked from the verge. "For fixing our fence," she said in a tiny voice, and then she ran back to her mother's skirts. Philip looked down at the flower, its pale yellow petals already starting to wilt in the heat of his palm, and felt something shift in his chest, some locked door swinging open. "You are welcome," he said, and his voice came out rough. He walked back to his shop with the flower in his hand and set it in a cup of water on his windowsill, and he did not let himself examine too closely why it mattered so much. After that it became easier. Anya still resisted his help, but her protests had less heat, and sometimes she accepted before he had to insist. He brought meat every morning without fail. He mended her roof on a Sunday in late summer, replacing the thin thatch with thick new bundles he bought from a farmer upriver. He brought the children each a pair of sturdy shoes when the evenings began to cool and autumn crept closer, claiming he had taken them in trade and had no use for them. Anya did not believe him. He could see that in her eyes, but she let her children keep the shoes. And when Marisol and Tovin ran circles around the cottage yard, delighted by the novel feeling of protected feet, she looked at him with an expression he could not name, but that made his throat tight. He learned more about her as the weeks passed, small details offered in the slow thaw of her trust. She had grown up in a clan to the north, in the foothills where the mountains began their climb toward the sky. She had married young, followed her husband south when he was cast out for some infraction she did not name. They had been happy despite their exile, or so she said. He had been a good man, a hard worker, someone who made her laugh, Philip did not ask how she had survived after his death. He could see it in the way she held herself, in the careful economy of her movements, in the fact that she still could not quite believe someone would help her without demanding something in return. She had survived the way people survived when the world had no place for them, by being useful, by being invisible, by swallowing her pride and her hunger and her grief, and carrying on because her children needed her to carry on. And now here he was, this gruff butcher with big hands and few words, inserting himself into her life with all the subtlety of a bull in a market stall. He fixed things. He brought food. He walked her home in the evenings when the streets grew dark, saying nothing, just making sure she and her children reached their door safely. He learned that Marisol loved stories and would sit rapt if he spoke even a few words about the world beyond the village. He learned that Tovin was fascinated by his work and would stand at the edge of the shop watching the careful dance of blade and flesh with an intensity that would have been disturbing in anyone but a small child. He learned that Anya hummed while she worked, low, tuneless sounds that seemed to ease her labor. He learned that she was afraid of storms, that thunder made her flinch and draw her children close. He learned that she took joy in small things, a warm breeze, a bird's song, the first stars coming out in the evening sky. And somewhere in the learning, somewhere in the slow accumulation of shared moments and quiet kindnesses, he fell in love with her. It was not a sudden thing. There was no lightning strike, no moment of revelation. It was simply that one morning he woke and realized that the shape of his days had changed, that he measured time now in terms of when he would see her, that the best part of every morning was watching her take the wrapped meat from his hands and hearing her say thank you in that soft, steady voice. He was 43 years old and had never been in love before, and he had no idea what to do about it. Autumn came in earnest, bringing shorter days and the first hard frosts. The strays that followed Anya grew thicker coats and pressed closer to her legs when she divided the bread, seeking warmth as much as food. Philip watched her feed them with the same patient care she had always shown, but now she ate too, standing there in the gray dawn with a piece of bread in her hand, chewing slowly as if trying to remember how. "You are eating first," he observed one morning. She glanced at him, and there was something almost shy in the look. "You told me to. I did not think you would listen. Neither did I." She broke off another piece of bread and held it out to the three-legged cat, which had grown bold enough to take food from her fingers. "But you were right. I was not helping anyone by starving myself, least of all my children." "Good," he said, and meant it with an intensity that surprised him. They stood together in the cold morning quiet, and he wanted to say something, wanted to tell her that watching her accept help was like watching something broken begin to heal. But he did not have the words, and so he just handed her the day's meat and let his fingers linger against hers for a moment longer than necessary. She did not pull away. The village prepared for winter. Harvests came in, animals were slaughtered and preserved, and Philip's shop grew busy with people buying meat to smoke or salt. He worked long hours and fell into bed exhausted, but he still woke before dawn to wrap meat for Anya, still stepped out to meet her at the well, still felt his heart lift when he saw her coming down the street with her basket. One evening in late autumn he walked her home as he often did, the children running ahead to open the gate he had fixed. The air was sharp with cold and the smell of coming snow, and their breath made clouds in the fading light. When they reached her door, Anya turned to him and said, "Would you like to come in? For supper?" It was the first time she had invited him inside, and he felt the weight of it, the significance. "I would," he said. The cottage was small but clean, a single room with a fireplace at one end and beds tucked into the corners. It smelled of wood smoke and the herbs she used for washing, and the warmth after the cold outside made his face tingle. The children settled at a small table while Anya ladled stew into bowls, and Philip stood awkwardly by the door until she gestured for him to sit. The stew was good, thick with vegetables and rich with the meat he had brought, and he ate in companionable silence while the children chattered about their day. Marisol had seen a fox in the woods. Tovin had found a perfect skipping stone by the river. They spoke with the easy enthusiasm of children who felt safe, and Philip realized with a start that they were less quiet now, less wary. They were healing too. After supper, Marisol climbed into his lap without asking and demanded a story, and he told her about the time he had seen a bear in the market, embellishing shamelessly, until she was giggling and Tovin was begging for more. Anya watched from her place by the fire, her hands busy with mending, and there was something soft in her face that made his chest ache. When the children finally went to bed, yawning and protesting in equal measure, Anya walked him to the door. The night outside was cold and crystalline, the stars like ice chips scattered across black velvet. "Thank you," she said, "for the meat, for the fence, for the roof, for everything. You do not need to thank me. I do, though." She wrapped her arms around herself, and he saw that she was shivering despite the warmth of the cottage at her back. "I do not know why you have been so kind to us. I do not know what I did to deserve it, but I am grateful. More than I can say." He looked at her, this stubborn, proud woman who had fed strays before herself, who had kept her children alive through sheer force of will, who was still half convinced that accepting help would cost her something she could not afford to give, and he decided to be brave. "You did not have to do anything to deserve it," he said. "That is not how it works." "Then how does it work?" "I see you," he said simply. "I see you feeding those strays every morning. I see you working yourself to exhaustion for your children. I see you walking through this village with your head high even though people look through you like you are not there. And I think," he stopped, searching for words, "I think you deserve to be fed too, to be cared for, to have someone see you and decide you matter." She was very still, her eyes enormous in the starlight. "Philip," she said, and his name in her mouth sounded like a question. "You do not have to say anything," he said quickly. "I am not asking for anything, I just wanted you to know you matter, to me." He turned and walked away before she could respond, his heart hammering in his chest, and he did not let himself look back. He had said what needed saying. The rest was up to her. The next morning she was at the well as always, dividing bread among the strays. But when he brought her the wrapped meat, she took it and held it against her chest and said, "You matter to me too." He could not speak past the sudden tightness in his throat, so he just nodded and went back to his shop. And for the rest of that day, everything felt lighter, brighter, as if the sun had decided to shine just for him. Winter arrived with the first snow, a light dusting that turned the world white and quiet. Philip made sure Anya had enough firewood stacked beside her cottage, made sure her children had warm clothes, made sure she understood that if she needed anything, anything at all, she had only to ask. She accepted his help with more grace now, though he could still see the struggle in her face sometimes, the old pride warring with new trust. They fell into a rhythm that felt almost like courtship, though neither of them named it as such. He brought meat each morning. She invited him for supper most evenings. He told the children stories while she mended or prepared the next day's washing. They talked about small things and large things, about the weather and the village and their lives before this, and slowly, carefully, they built something between them that felt solid and real. He learned that her favorite color was blue, the blue of summer sky. She learned that he had wanted to be a carpenter before his father's butcher shop needed someone to inherit it. He learned that she missed her clan sometimes, missed the sound of orcish voices singing in the evening, missed being surrounded by people who looked like her. She learned that he was lonely, that he had always been lonely, that his life before her had been a narrow thing built around work and sleep, and not much else. And through it all the strays kept coming, kept waiting by the well each morning for their share of bread. But now Anya ate first, standing there in the cold dawn with food in her hand, and Philip watched her do it and felt something settle in his chest, something that had been restless and anxious for longer than he could remember. Midwinter came, and with it the longest night of the year. The village held a small celebration in the common house, and Philip invited Anya and her children to come with him. She hesitated, and he saw the old wariness flicker across her face, the knowledge that an orc woman at a human celebration would draw stares and whispers. "Please," he said. "Come with me. Let people see what, that you are mine," he said, and watched her eyes go wide. "If you want to be, if that is something you would want." She was quiet for a long moment, her hands twisting in her skirts. Then she said, "People will not like it." "I do not care what people like. They will make it difficult for you, for your business. Let them try." He stepped closer, close enough that he could see the fine lines at the corners of her eyes, the small scar on her jaw that he had never asked about. "I am asking you to come with me to the celebration, as my family, because that is what you are, what you have been for months now, and I want everyone to know it." Her breath caught, and he saw tears well in her eyes. "Philip," she whispered, "is that a yes?" She laughed, a sound that was half sob, and nodded. "Yes. Yes, that is a yes." They went to the celebration together, the four of them walking through the snowy streets with the children running ahead. People stared, just as Anya had predicted. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Heads turned to follow their progress. But Philip kept his hand on the small of her back, kept her close, and when they entered the common house and he found them seats near the fire, he saw the moment people understood. The butcher had claimed the orc widow. They were together. This was real. Not everyone was pleased. He heard the mutters, saw the disapproving looks. But he also saw a few smiles, a few nods, and when one of the older women came over to compliment Marisol's dress and ruffle Tovin's hair, he felt Anya relax beside him. They ate roasted meat and winter vegetables, drank spiced cider, and watched the children play with the other village youngsters. Marisol was shy at first, hanging back, but soon she was racing around with the others, her laughter ringing out clear and bright. Tovin stayed closer to his mother, but even he ventured out eventually, drawn by the promise of honey cakes and games. "They are happy," Anya said softly, watching them. "So are you," Philip said. She turned to look at him, and there was wonder in her face, as if she could not quite believe her own good fortune. "I am," she said. "For the first time in years I am happy." He took her hand under the table, laced his fingers through hers, and held on. "Good," he said. "That is how it should be." They stayed until the fire burned low and the children were yawning, and then they walked home through the silent, snow-covered streets. At her door, Anya turned to him and said, "Will you come in?" "It is late," he said. "I know." She stepped closer, and he could feel the warmth of her even through their winter clothes. "But I do not want you to go, not tonight." His heart kicked hard against his ribs. "Anya, I am not asking for forever," she said quickly. "I know that is too much. I know I know this is new. But I want you to stay. I want to wake up and have you be there, just for tonight. Is that all right?" He cupped her face in his hands, felt the cold of her skin and the warmth beneath it, and knew he would give her anything she asked for. "That is more than all right," he said, and kissed her. She melted against him with a sound that was half sigh, half sob, and he wrapped his arms around her and held her close while the snow fell around them, and the world narrowed to just this, just her. just the two of them finally finding each other after so much loneliness. They went inside and settled the children, who were too sleepy to question why Philip was staying. Then they sat by the fire and talked in low voices about everything and nothing, and when the fire finally died, they went to her narrow bed and lay down together, fully clothed, just holding each other in the dark. "I never thought I would have this again," Anya whispered. "Someone to hold me. Someone who wanted to." "I want to," Philip said. "I want to hold you every night for the rest of my life if you will let me." She was quiet for so long he thought she might have fallen asleep. Then she said, "Ask me again in the morning, when you have had time to think about what you are saying." "I have thought about it for months. Ask me anyway, please." He kissed her temple, breathed in the scent of her hair, and promised he would. Then he held her while she slept, and he did not sleep himself for a long time, too full of wonder at the weight of her in his arms, the reality of her trust. Morning came cold and bright, the sun turning the snow to diamonds. Philip woke to find Anya already up, standing by the window and looking out at the dawn. He rose and went to her, wrapped his arms around her from behind, and she leaned back against him with a sigh. "I am still here," he said. "I see that. And I still mean what I said last night." She turned in his arms and looked up at him, and he saw that her eyes were bright but not with tears. "Then ask me." He took a breath and said the words he had been practicing in his head all night. "I do not want to court you. I do not want some long, slow dance where we pretend to be careful and sensible. I want to share a household with you. I want to wake up with you every morning and go to sleep with you every night. I want to help raise your children and feed your strays and fix whatever breaks and make sure you eat first always. I want to be yours and for you to be mine, plainly and simply, for as long as we both live. Will you let me do that?" Her smile was like the sun coming up, bright and warm and impossible to look away from. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will let you do that." He kissed her then, properly, deeply, and she kissed him back with a fierceness that took his breath away. When they broke apart, they were both breathing hard, and he could hear the children stirring in their beds, waking to the new day. "We should tell them," Anya said. "Now, why wait?" She laughed, giddy with happiness, and pulled him toward the children's corner of the room. "Marisol, Tovin, wake up, we have news." The children sat up, blinking and confused, and Philip felt a moment of pure terror. What if they did not want him? What if they rejected him? But then Marisol looked at him and said, "Are you staying forever now?" And Tovin said, "Does that mean you are our papa?" And he realized they had been waiting for the adults to catch up. "If you want me to be," he said. "Yes," Marisol said immediately, and Tovin nodded so hard his whole body moved. "Then I am staying," Philip said, and felt the last locked door in his chest swing open. The winter weeks that followed were the happiest of Philip's life. He moved his few belongings into Anya's cottage, and they rearranged the space to accommodate him. He kept the butcher shop, of course, but now he came home each evening to a house full of warmth and noise and life. Marisol pestered him with endless questions. Tovin followed him everywhere, a small devoted shadow. And Anya bloomed like a flower finally given water, her face filling out, her eyes losing that haunted edge, her laughter coming easier and more often. They were not without challenges. The village had opinions about their arrangement, and not all of them were kind. Some people stopped buying meat from Philip, claiming they would not do business with an orc lover. Others made pointed comments within Anya's hearing, cruel little barbs designed to wound. But Philip had been right when he said he did not care what people thought, and Anya discovered that with him beside her she could weather the disapproval. Together they were stronger than either had been alone, and there were allies too, people who surprised them. The old woman who had complimented Marisol at the celebration began stopping by with small gifts, a loaf of bread, a jar of preserves. The blacksmith, a taciturn man Philip had known for years, started going out of his way to nod to Anya on the street, a small gesture that meant more than words. The miller's wife hired Anya to do her family's washing and paid her fairly, without the usual haggling. Slowly, incrementally, the village adjusted. It helped that Marisol and Tovin were well-behaved, polite, impossible to dislike. It helped that Anya worked hard and caused no trouble. But mostly it helped that Philip made it clear he would tolerate no disrespect toward his family, and people knew him well enough to believe he meant it. The strays still came each morning, and Anya still fed them, but now Philip helped her divide the bread, and there was always enough. More than enough. He made sure of it. The dogs grew fat and sleek, the three-legged cat bold enough to come inside and sleep by the fire. The cottage that had once felt empty and cold was now crowded with warmth, with love, with the messy, beautiful reality of a family building itself from scraps and hope. Spring returned, and with it the promise of new beginnings. Philip and Anya decided to expand the cottage, to add a second room so the children could have their own space. He did most of the work himself, rising early to lay stone and frame walls before opening the shop. Anya helped when she could, and the children contributed in their own way, fetching tools and holding boards steady and chattering about how wonderful it would be to have more room. On a warm evening in early spring, with the frogs singing in the marsh and the smell of blossoms heavy on the air, Philip and Anya stood together looking at the new room, which was nearly finished. The children were inside playing, their voices drifting out through the open door, and the strays were sprawled in the yard, content and full. "We have built something good here," Anya said softly. "We have," Philip agreed. She leaned against him, and he put his arm around her shoulders, and they stood in comfortable silence while the evening deepened around them. He thought about the morning he had first seen her dividing bread among the strays, how thin she had been, how alone. He thought about how far they had come since then, how much had changed. "You regret it?" Anya asked suddenly. "Taking us on, we have made your life harder in some ways." He tightened his arm around her. "No," he said firmly. "I do not regret it, not for a moment. You have made my life better in every way that matters." She tilted her head to look up at him, and he saw tears on her cheeks, but she was smiling. "I love you," she said. "I should have said it sooner, but I was afraid. I am not afraid anymore." "I love you too," he said, and kissed her while the frogs sang and the stars came out, and somewhere in the cottage the children laughed. Summer came, and the village held a midsummer fair. There was music and dancing, stalls selling sweets and trinkets, games for the children. Philip took his family, and this time there were no stares, no whispers. People had grown used to seeing them together, had accepted that the butcher and the orc widow were a permanent fixture. Marisol won a ribbon for foot races, and Tovin ate so much honeycomb he made himself sick, and Anya danced with Philip in the square while the musicians played and the lanterns swayed overhead. "I never thought I would have this," Anya said as they swayed together, her arms around his neck and his hands on her waist. "A home, a family, someone who loves me." "You have it now," Philip said, "and I am not going anywhere, promise, I promise." She laid her head on his chest and they danced in the warm summer night, and Philip thought that this, right here, was what happiness felt like. Not grand or dramatic, just simple and true. A woman in his arms, children playing nearby, a community that had learned to accept them, a future stretching out ahead full of ordinary days and quiet joys. When the fair ended, they walked home together, Tovin asleep on Philip's shoulder and Marisol holding her mother's hand and yawning. The strays met them at the door, tails wagging, and Philip shooed them away gently so they could get the children inside. He and Anya tucked them into bed, then stepped outside to sit on the bench Philip had built beside the door. The night was warm and soft, the air thick with the scent of growing things. Somewhere an owl called, and from the marsh came the endless chorus of frogs. Anya leaned against Philip's side, and he put his arm around her, and they sat in companionable silence. "I have been thinking," Anya said after a while. "About what? About making it official. Us, I mean." Philip's heart skipped. "Official how? Marriage?" She sat up to look at him, and in the moonlight her face was serious and open. "I know we are already living as a family. I know it does not change anything practical, but I would like to stand up in front of people and say vows, make promises. I want everyone to know that we chose each other." "Is that foolish?" "No," Philip said, his voice rough. "That is not foolish at all. I would be honored to marry you." Her smile was radiant. "Truly, truly." He cupped her face in his hands. "I will marry you tomorrow if you want, or we can wait and do it properly with a celebration. Whatever you want." "I want properly," she said. "I want our children there and our friends, and I want to wear something nice and have you wear something nice, and I want it to be a day we remember." "Then that is what we will do," he said, and kissed her. They married on a golden autumn afternoon when the leaves were turning and the air was crisp with the promise of winter. The ceremony was held in the village square, officiated by the traveling priest who came through twice a year. Philip wore his best clothes, and Anya wore a dress of deep blue that she and the miller's wife had sewn together. And Marisol and Tovin stood beside them as witnesses, scrubbed clean and beaming with pride. The whole village turned out, some because they were genuinely happy for the couple, and some because they would not miss such a spectacle for the world. But Philip did not care about their reasons. He cared only about Anya, about the way she looked at him as they spoke their vows, about the way her hand trembled in his when he slipped a simple band of silver onto her finger. "I promised to feed you first," he said, and people laughed because they did not understand, but Anya did. She squeezed his hand and blinked back tears and said, "I promise to let you." The priest pronounced them married, and Philip kissed his wife while the crowd cheered and the children whooped and the strays barked in excitement. Then there was food and music and dancing. And for one perfect afternoon, the butcher and the orc laundress were the center of the village's world, celebrated and welcomed and seen. Later, after the celebration had wound down and they had returned home, Philip and Anya stood together in their cottage and looked around at the life they had built. The children were asleep in their new room, worn out from the day's excitement. The strays were curled up by the fire, content. And on the table was a basket of food left over from the wedding feast, more than enough to last them for days. "We have so much," Anya said wonderingly. "I never dreamed I would have so much." "You deserve it," Philip said. "All of it and more." She turned to him and wrapped her arms around his waist, and he held her close, breathing in the scent of her hair, feeling the steady beat of her heart against his chest. "Thank you," she whispered, "for seeing me, for feeding me, for loving me." "Thank you for letting me," he said. They stood there in the firelight, holding each other, and outside the autumn wind picked up and sent leaves skittering across the yard. Winter was coming, but they were ready for it. They had each other and they had their children, and they had a home full of warmth and love, and the certain knowledge that they were no longer alone. The years that followed were good ones. Not perfect, because life is never perfect, but good. Philip's business thrived, and Anya's reputation as a skilled laundress spread beyond the village. Marisol grew tall and clever, with her mother's determination and her stepfather's steady kindness. Tovin grew into a thoughtful boy who loved animals and wanted to be a healer. The strays came and went, some staying, some moving on, but there were always a few lingering around the cottage, drawn by the certainty of food and kindness. Philip and Anya added to their family in the 4th year of their marriage, a daughter they named Lisa, who had her mother's green skin and her father's blue eyes, and a laugh that could light up the darkest room. 2 years later came another daughter, Joran, quieter than her sister but equally loved. The cottage expanded again to hold them all, and if it was crowded and noisy and sometimes chaotic, well, that was how a home should be. On cold winter mornings, Philip still rose before dawn to prepare meat for the day. But now Anya rose with him, and they worked together in the comfortable silence of long familiarity. And when the sun came up, and the strays gathered by the door, the whole family would come out to feed them, Marisol dividing bread and Tovin making sure the water bowls were filled, and the little ones scattering grain for the birds that had learned to come begging. But before any of that, before the strays were fed or the day's work begun, Philip would take Anya's hand and lead her to the table. He would set a plate before her, heaped with good things, and he would sit beside her and watch her eat. She would smile at him, this woman who had once starved herself to feed others, and she would take the first bite, and only then would the rest of the day begin. "You eat first," he would say, the old ritual still holding power after all these years. "I eat first," she would agree, and her eyes would be warm with love and trust and the deep contentment of someone who had finally learned to let herself be cared for. And so the days passed, one after another, each one ordinary and precious. The butcher and the orc woman lived their lives, raised their children, fed their strays, and loved each other with a fierce and quiet devotion that needed no grand gestures or dramatic declarations. They had found each other in the gray dawn of an ordinary morning, two lonely people learning to be less alone, and they had built something beautiful from that simple beginning. In the evenings, when the work was done and the children were settled and the strays were sprawled in the yard, Philip and Anya would sit together on their bench and watch the sun go down. Sometimes they talked about the day's events, the small triumphs and frustrations. Sometimes they sat in comfortable silence, her head on his shoulder and his arm around her waist. And sometimes Anya would say, "Do you remember when we met, how thin I was, how scared?" And Philip would kiss her temple and say, "I remember, but that is not who you are anymore." "No," she would agree. "I am not that person anymore. You changed me." "We changed each other," he would correct gently. "I was lonely before you. I did not even know how lonely until you were not there to come home to. You gave me a reason to be more than just a man who worked and slept and waited to die. You gave me a family. You gave me a life." And she would tighten her hold on him, and they would sit there until the stars came out. Two people who had saved each other without even meaning to, who had found in each other something worth fighting for, worth changing for, worth building a life around. The story could end there with Philip and Anya content in their home, their children healthy and happy, their strays fed and their love secure. But life is not a story, and it does not end with a single perfect moment. It goes on, day after day, year after year, through good times and hard times, through laughter and tears and all the messy, complicated beauty of being alive. So the story continues. Marisol grows up and becomes a teacher, patient and kind like her stepfather and fierce like her mother. Tovin becomes an apprentice to the village healer and discovers a gift for soothing pain and mending hurts. Lisa proves to have her mother's head for numbers and becomes an invaluable help in managing the household accounts. Joran, the quietest of them all, surprises everyone by announcing she wants to travel, to see the world beyond their small village. Philip and Anya grow older, their hair graying, their movements slower. But they are still there for each other, still sitting on the bench in the evenings, still feeding the strays each morning. The children grow and leave and come back again, bringing grandchildren who learn from their grandmother how to be kind to strays and from their grandfather how to work with steady patience. And through it all, every single morning without fail, Philip makes sure Anya eats first. It is the foundation of their life together, this simple act of care, this daily reminder that she matters, that she is loved, that she will never again have to starve herself to feed others. On a spring morning many years after their wedding, when Philip is old and his hands are not as steady as they once were, he wakes to find Anya already up, standing by the window as she had on the morning after they first spoke their love aloud. He goes to her and wraps his arms around her from behind, and she leans into him with a sigh of contentment. "Good morning," she says. "Good morning," he replies and kisses the side of her neck. "The strays are waiting. They can wait a moment more." He turns her to face him, and even now, even after all these years, the sight of her takes his breath away. She is older, yes, her face lined and her hair silver, but she is still the most beautiful thing he has ever seen. "I love you," he says. "I love you too," she says, and her smile is the same one she gave him on their wedding day, bright and warm and full of wonder. They go outside together, and the strays gather, a shifting pack of dogs and cats who have learned that this house means food and safety. The children and grandchildren emerge from the cottage, sleepy and yawning, and together they feed the strays, dividing bread and meat with the easy practice of long routine. But first, before any of that, Anya sits at the table and eats the breakfast Philip has prepared for her. She eats slowly, savoring each bite, and he sits beside her and watches with the same satisfaction he has felt every morning for decades. "You eat first," he says, the old words as necessary as breathing. "I eat first," she agrees and reaches for his hand. They sit together in the early morning light, this man and this woman who found each other in the gray dawn and decided to build a life together. Around them, their family stirs and wakes, the strays are fed, the village begins its daily rhythm. But here in this moment, it is just the two of them, holding hands across the table, eating breakfast together as the sun comes up. It is ordinary. It is miraculous. It is everything they ever needed. And when the meal is done and the day begins in earnest, Philip stands and offers Anya his hand. She takes it and rises, and together they walk out into the spring morning, ready for whatever comes next, knowing that as long as they have each other, they can face anything. The strays fall into step behind them, a small parade of grateful creatures who know that here in this place, they will always be fed and cared for. And the village watches them pass, this old couple and their menagerie, and people smile because everyone knows their story now. The butcher who saw a woman starving herself to feed strays and decided to feed her first. The orc widow who learned to let herself be loved. The family they built from nothing, from scraps and hope and the simple daily practice of choosing each other. It is a good story. It is a true story. And it is theirs, in the end. That is all that matters. Not what people think or say, not the prejudices they faced or the obstacles they overcame, but simply this. They found each other, they chose each other, and they built a life full of love and warmth, and the certain knowledge that they would never be alone again. The sun rises higher, burning off the morning mist. The strays scatter to find sunny spots for napping. The children and grandchildren go about their days. And Philip and Anya walk hand in hand through the village they have called home for so many years. Two people who learned that the greatest act of love is not grand gestures or dramatic sacrifices, but the simple daily choice to feed each other, to care for each other, to make sure that neither ever goes hungry again. They have been married for 30 years when Philip wakes one morning to find Anya still asleep beside him, her breathing shallow and labored. Fear grips his heart, but he pushes it down and sends for the healer, and for 3 days he sits by her bedside while she fights whatever illness has taken hold. The children come and the grandchildren, and they take turns keeping vigil, but it is Philip who never leaves, who holds her hand and talks to her and reminds her that she has to stay, she has to fight, because he is not ready to lose her. On the 4th day she opens her eyes and smiles at him, and he knows she will be all right. The healer says it was a close thing, that she needs rest and good food and time to heal, and Philip nods and sets about making sure she has all 3. He cooks for her, soft foods that are easy to eat, and he sits beside her bed and watches her swallow every bite. He does not let her lift a finger to help with the household, does not let her worry about the washing or the strays or anything but getting better. "You are taking care of me," she says one afternoon, her voice weak but amused. "Of course I am," he says. "That is what I do. You have been doing it for 30 years. I will do it for 30 more if I can." She reaches for his hand and holds it, her grip fragile but sure. "I know," she says, "and I will let you. That is what I do." He laughs, though his eyes are bright with tears he will not let fall, and he kisses her palm and holds her hand until she falls asleep again. She recovers slowly but surely, and by the time summer arrives she is back on her feet, thinner than before but still strong, still stubborn, still his Anya. They celebrate her recovery with a family dinner. All the children and grandchildren crowded into the cottage, and there is laughter and noise and love enough to fill the world. That evening, after everyone has gone home and the house is quiet again, Philip and Anya sit on their bench and watch the stars come out. The strays are sprawled in the yard, content. Somewhere a nightjar calls, a low repetitive sound that blends with the chorus of crickets and frogs. "I thought I was going to lose you," Philip says quietly. "You did not, though," Anya says. "I am still here." "Because you are too stubborn to die," she laughs. "Maybe because I have too much to live for." He puts his arm around her and she leans into him, and they sit in the warm summer darkness, 2 old people who have loved each other well and long. They do not talk about the future or what comes next. They do not need to. They have built a life together, raised children, created a family, fed 1,000 strays. They have loved each other through good times and bad, through sickness and health, through all the ordinary, extraordinary days of a shared life. And when the time comes when one of them finally has to let the other go, they will face it the way they have faced everything else. Together, for as long as they can. And when together is no longer possible, the one left behind will carry the other in their heart, will remember the lessons learned, will keep feeding the strays and eating first and living the life they built together. But that time is not yet. For now they are here, sitting on their bench, watching the stars, holding each other close. For now there is still time for morning breakfasts and evening walks, for grandchildren's laughter and the contented sighs of well-fed strays. For now they are still together, still choosing each other, still proving every single day that love is not about grand gestures but about small daily acts of care and kindness. "You eat first," Philip murmurs into her hair. "I eat first," she agrees, and in those words is the whole of their story, the whole of their love, the whole of the life they have built together from nothing but determination and hope, and the simple revolutionary act of feeding each other before themselves. The night deepens. The stars wheel overhead, and on a bench outside a small cottage at the edge of a village, 2 people sit together and count their blessings, which are many, and chief among them is this: they found each other. They chose each other. And they built something beautiful that will outlast them both, a legacy of love and kindness that their children and grandchildren will carry forward long after they are gone. But for now, for this moment, they are here. They are together, and that is everything.